three important things are happening today, important and interesting. Two have happened in a way. One is happening. What's happening, we know about, we will know what happened there by tomorrow. That is the India-China Corps Commander level talks currently taking place on the Indian side in the Chushul, Moldo region. That is about the disengagement process in hot springs area. So we'll talk about that in the course of time as we get to know more. But since the focus is on that part of our geography or that part of our geostrategic region, which is very, very vital, we are also picking up two more very interesting pointers today. The first is that Pakistan government, it looks like, is releasing its first national security policy, NSP, and this will be applicable for the next 5 years. Now, you can always say about Pakistan, next 5 years, kisne dekha hai next 5 years? Who knows who will be in power for the next 5 years and who will decide on what? You would presume that since this is the national security policy, this also has the army's buy-in institutionally, and that's the one institution in Pakistan that continues. And this national security policy makes some important points. It says, for example, that Pakistan does not seek hostility for India with India for the next 100 years. Now, that is a bit of a departure from the old boast that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto started, that his daughter, who relative to others in Pakistan was seen to be liberal or pacifist, she repeated that boast in 1991 of a 1,000-year war on India. Right now, there's talk of 100 years of not seeking any hostility with India. In fact, even the 5-year plan, 2022 to 26, talks about increasing trade relations between India and Pakistan. So that's a very important pointer. Now, these are early pointers. Some parts of the report or some parts of the plan or policy have been put out. The detailed policy will be out on Friday. When that comes out, we'll talk more about it. But it's very important. The third thing is our Army Chief, General Naravane's press conference. And this is his usual annual pre-Army Day press conference. It always takes place a couple of days before the Army Day. Army Day is in a couple of days. Now, there he talked about many things. He talked about China, Pakistan. He also talked about Nagaland, about the recent killings, which he called regrettable. But importantly, he talked about Siachen. And he said something interesting about Siachen, which we haven't heard from the Indian strategic establishment at the top for some time. He said India would be quite open to the idea of demilitarization in Siachen if the Pakistanis accept the actual ground position, which means on a map, demarcate where you are and where we are, which means where India is, where Pakistan is. Then have commitments not to transgress that area. What that means is it establishes one, what is with India and what is with Pakistan right now. And if that is established, it's quite fine for India. And the second thing is that makes the Pakistani army accept that they actually lost all this territory to India. Now, that's been the tough part for Pakistan. In fact, some of this had come up in 1989 under Rajiv Gandhi. Later, even in BP Singh's times, India and Pakistan were very close to a settlement on Siachen with demilitarization of the area, but it always got stuck on the same principle because the Indian side wanted, let the Pakistanis acknowledge where they are right now and where we are right now, right? Where India is right now. But having boasted all this while about having a much superior army to India's, etc., and also the fact that unlike the Indian army, Pakistani army thinks that it is also the guardian of the ideological frontiers of the state, whereby it also has an exaggerated, a completely domineering position in Pakistani power structure and politics. How do they then admit that they have lost this territory to Indian army? And this is not even an area where the Russians came and helped India or the Americans came and helped India or somebody did. This was really soldier versus soldier, platoon versus platoon, section versus section. This was really a battle of the two very tough armies, skills and also determination. So for the current army chief to say this is very interesting, and that is 2.5 years after the changes in Kashmir. Once again, the policy document that Pakistan is talking about, their national security policy document, it does not lay down the precondition of a resolution of the Kashmir issue with India before beginning to normalize trade, etc. Now we'll again see what happens on Friday. What is it like in detail? But if this actually comes out and it has the buy-in of the Pakistani army, then we are looking at some interesting prospect. Now let's talk about the Pakistani national security policy. As I told you, the Pakistanis say they will not seek hostility with India for the next 100 years. We don't know. There's no promise after the next 100 years. But I think we are quite okay if they are at peace with us for the foreseeable future, next 5, 10, 15 years, because then peace itself builds a vested interest in further peace, in sort of de-escalation of hostilities and historical tensions. Again, the Pakistani national security policy says that economic security is central to our security going ahead. So first of all, economic security, because we know what the Pakistanis are dealing with at this point. At this point, they are short of money at all levels, not just foreign exchange, but they are short of money. The inflation has been going very high, partly also because they've borrowed from IMF on very tough terms and they are having to up utility prices. They are having to up taxes. More importantly, they are having to collect the bills for utilities instead of bill waiver. See what's happening in Punjab right now. Sabke bijli ke bill maaf. Chief Minister of our Punjab has even been seen burning electricity bills. Right? Pakistanis can't do that anymore, and politicians don't like to be in a situation where they can't do that. So that is the reason right now that they have postponed. They've deferred briefly for the moment the release of the next lot of IMF loans to them, because IMF wants these conditionalities filled. So IMF has also deferred this meeting to later in the month, maybe 28th January or after that, because Pakistanis have to take these tough decisions. The big threat to Pakistan right now is economic, and they are looking at the cost, I would say. I hope they are. There is some wishful thinking on my part. They are most likely or probably and hopefully looking at the costs of this continuing hostility with China, because what is it doing? On the one hand, it's making them borrow from IMF and also from UAE and Saudi Arabia at such onerous terms, and on the other hand, they are ceding so much of their sovereignty to the Chinese. So this is a very important development. Now, this makes the usual noises about Kashmir. You should see our 50-word edit on this. They say Kashmir is vital to our national security policy, etc., etc. But once again, they are not insisting on anything. That is progress. But once again, let's wait till Friday, and there will be other Fridays after that, and let us see how this progresses. So this is a very good indication. In fact, I also read an article by my old colleague Zahid Hussain, the Pakistani columnist and editor, a wonderful editor and writer, and a very good judge and a very good student of Pakistani politics. And he's written in this column in Dawn that national security policy, etc., is fine. But if you have a system right now, the political system or the governing system in Pakistan, which is non-functional, and there is political instability, how can you have any of this? Now, to bring those back, to bring order back, they cannot continue to be hostile, to have this hostile relationship with India forever. So once again, we'll take an optimistic view. We'll read that there is some, at least in terms of the mood, there is some progress between India and China. Both India and China have not been saying rude things about each other. There was also that exchange of sweets and gifts on the New Year's Day. There is also the prospect of a tripartite summit coming up between India, Russia, and China. The Chinese have interest there because they have the Winter Olympics coming up, which large parts of the Western world are boycotting, for which they need support and some legitimacy. The Russians are sort of honest brokers in this. So while India says it does not want a third-party intervention, the Chinese have walked around our neighborhood, in fact in our periphery right now, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and said that issues in the subcontinent or in the region should not have third-party intervention. But the fact is, like it or not, the Russians are playing a role in the India-China situation. Around the 57th anniversary of the Tashkent Accord, it is ironical, but it's also very interesting that once again, Russians are emerging as sort of peace brokers in the region. How successful they are this time, we shall see. But the fact is that this is also progress. This round of talks between India and China is progress. Now, Siachen, the chief saying that if the Pakistanis accept where we are and accept they are and draw the line like that, then it's okay. And he actually elaborates. He elaborates quite intelligently in terms of what demilitarization is. He says that, look, first of all, you say disengage, right? That he says what's happening between us and the Chinese is exactly this. First, you disengage, right? Get your troops away from each other. So something like that Galwan Valley clash cannot take place. First of all, you disengage, then you de-escalate, and then you de-induct, which means that you take your big bodies of forces back home to their barracks. That is when you have normalcy. And he says that is demilitarization. And he says that is what, if you want demilitarization in Siachen, that is what it will be. So first you disengage, then you de-escalate, then you de-induct. But before that, you must define where you are. And that is what the Pakistanis have to do. So I'm not wagering anything on the Pakistanis accepting it. All I am saying is that after more than 25 years, I have seen somebody at the top of the Indian strategic establishment making that point, or at least talking about that possibility or being open to that possibility. Having said that, I think it's also a good opportunity for us to revisit the Siachen situation. Now, Siachen is something that's imprinted on all our minds. Siachen Glacier and the point NJ9842 marked on the map on the line of control between Indian and Pakistani held territories in that area, that all of us have heard about. We also know that it was in 1994 that the Indian Army climbed up and took over not just the Siachen Glacier. Glacier, if you see this map, is like a frozen river that's coming down. But you cannot sit on the glacier, and you cannot protect the glacier if you're on the heights this side of the glacier. So to protect the glacier, also to mark their own territory or their own territorial claims, Indian Army climbed up on the heights west of the glacier. So those heights are Saltoro Range, Saltoro Heights. That is where the Indian Army is sitting. So Indian Army controls the entire Saltoro range at the top. The Pakistanis are on the other side, on the lower side of the Saltoro valleys, and this goes then right up to the tri-junction of Indian, Pakistani and Chinese held territories. That's where we come to Shaksgam Valley. So if you go to the extreme northeastern point of Indian controlled territory along the Siachen Glacier or overlooking the Siachen Glacier on the Saltoro side, from that point you can look down on Shaksgam Valley, which as you can see was very crucial to China if they were to control these passes, that is Karakoram Pass, Hunjra Pass, etc. That entire zone is crucial. It is critical to CPEC as well. Anyway, that's also a place where India and China are very close, and that is what also explains to us the importance of a place like Daulat Beg Oldi, which is very close to Karakoram Pass, which is next to Depsang Plains, and that's where Depsang Plains still continues to be a complex area which will not be discussed right now, because both India and China have said that this is a legacy problem. Now, if you want to understand a bit more about Siachen, books have been written about Siachen and books will be written about Siachen. Please refer to an article that we just published last week, an article by Amit Paul. Now, Amit Paul is a bright young lawyer who's also been doing research on a very interesting subject. He's been researching the 1948 Karachi ceasefire agreement between India and Pakistan. That ceasefire agreement had ended the fighting in Kashmir at that point, the first war for Kashmir. That is the agreement where the roots of this Siachen Glacier dispute lie. Because when line was being drawn, line of control was being drawn on that map, everybody said, okay, we've now come to this point along Saltoro range. After this, these are very high areas. Nobody's going to go there. Nobody's ever surveyed that area. So the demarcation of the line of control stopped at this point called NJ9842, and then said, thence the line runs along the glaciers and then goes to Karakoram Pass, etc. Now what had happened was that over time, the line which should have run along the glaciers, how come this line ran straight, as if somebody had drawn it with a foot ruler ran straight at the base of the glacier. So that means about 2,600 to 3,000 square kilometers of area was sort of allocated to Pakistan, which was not the intention of both sides when they drew that map, right? How did that happen? Now, to understand that, please read this brilliant article by young Amit Paul, because he tells you of this very interesting story about a man called Colonel Narendra Bull Kumar. He was always called Colonel Bull Kumar, who was a great mountaineer and also an adventurer, right? Remember, the 13 highest peaks in India, over 24,000 feet, expeditions that climbed on to 9 the first time were led by him. So he was such a redoubtable mountaineer, but also a soldier. He was commissioned in 3rd Kumaon. Now, he in 1978 was Indian Army's high altitude warfare school in Gulmarg, and according to Amit Paul, that is when 2 German adventurers came to meet him. Now, these 2 German adventurers who reached Bull Kumar's office in 1978 were Dr. Volker Stahlbaum and Dr. Yaroslav Ponkar. German adventurers knew him and he knew them very well because they had partnered in a rafting expedition on the Indus earlier. And these two said that they talked about this area of Saltoro, Siachen, etc., and they plonked a map on his desk. And that map showed a line drawn from point NJ9842 straight, as if by a ruler. You can see that map, you can see that pennant-like territory. You see those pennants on Tibetan temples, Jandi, right? Those pennant-like territories, and this line was drawn at the bottom of the pennant. So pennant was given away to Pakistan. And he got suspicious and he said, I've never seen this line before on this map. Who drew this line and who draws these straight lines in mountains of these altitudes and these complexity? And in any case, no Indian map, no international map until then had that line. Now, I have also been mystified as to where that line came from, which I ascribe to my own lack of scholarship. So Amit Paul has now figured this out. He tells you that in 1968, the Charge d'Affaires of the American Embassy in Delhi, because he was getting a lot of inquiries about what exactly that area is, that area in the Himalayas in the Kashmir region is, which is contested by India, Pakistan, and part of it, as you go north and west, by China as well. So on 27th June of 1968, William Weathersby, who was then Charge d'Affaires at the US Embassy in Delhi, he sent a query to the State Department asking for a clarification on this part of Kashmir, this part of Kashmiri territory contested by 3 sides in a way, India and Pakistan, but then as you go west and north, also by the Chinese, between the Chinese and the Indian side. So in reply, State Department, obviously somebody held a meeting on some desk, and the State Department cartographer at that time, who was Robert Hodgson, he looked at the maps and he said, all right, thence along the glaciers means just go along the glaciers, like take a foot ruler and connect it straight to Karakoram area. And that is how that map came into being. And once that map came into being, the Americans start using it for their aviation because the US military and Air Force needed that to define their own air defense information zone. And soon enough, Pakistanis began to republish it, and also many international expeditions started coming into the same Siachen area, coming in from Pakistani side, taking permission from there as if it was Pakistani territories. And what did Colonel Bull Kumar do? When these adventurers, German adventurers were leaving, he said, listen, where have you got this map from? Can I have this map? What did it cost you? So they sold him that map for 500 rupees. And that is when he started planning this expedition to Siachen Glacier. And that is what finally led to Operation Meghdoot in 1984, when India beat Pakistan to that region by exactly 1 day. Because Pakistani army had also planned something that they called Operation Ababil. So it was Operation Meghdoot versus Operation Ababil. Now, Ababil, I am told, means a swarm of birds, but it's also a Quranic term or Quranic concept, whereby it seems that God in some battle sent flocks of sparrows carrying stones which were dropped on enemy soldiers, killing them. So Operation Ababil from Pakistani side, Operation Meghdoot from the Indian side. Between 1978 and 84 also much had happened. So once he heard about this sort of in early 1978, Colonel Kumar got concerned. And then he decided to go forward and explore the area. So 2nd of September of 1978 itself, he led a team of 50 climbers in that area. They got to the base of the glacier, began from Khalsa region in Ladakh, and then went up, traversed the glacier, went to the other side of the glacier, and took the Khalsa, Tegar, Sasoma, Tongstedt, Varshi route. You can see it on the map, and got to the snout of the glacier, and then went up right up to Tiramkangri Peak. Now the Tiramkangri Peak cluster, these are very high mountains. These are all in about 7,400, 7,500 meters. That is about 24,000 to 25,000 feet in very difficult areas. So he climbed there and he found that as he got there, he could see all of Shakskan Valley on one side and also the Pakistani controlled territory. And he understood the strategic and tactical significance of that place, particularly if the Pakistanis were to come and acquire control of it with the Chinese behind them. And that is when India began planning this longer operation. Now, the footnote to this story is just after the spring of 1984, Indian Army climbed this area. They didn't just take the glacier, they took the entire Saltoro range and they climbed right up to Indrakol, which is the other extreme of this area. So they took all the heights on the other side of the glacier as well and beat the Pakistanis to it. Now that happened early, just before summer began in 1984. And you know what happened? After that, India began pressing the Americans, saying, how did you draw this line on your map? So in 1986, the Americans again got back to India and they said that they were now rectifying that line. So it was in 1986 when this bad line was erased because India again sent a protest to the Americans. And then you know what? Possession is ownership, or possession is half of ownership. India possessed the area, so the American State Department decided to also correct its map. So George Demko, who 1986 was the chief cartographer at the US State Department, he then said that he was erasing this line and this line was then erased. And since then, international maps have stopped that line at NJ 9842. Of course, beyond that, India has that pennant-shaped territory firmly in its control right now. And the chief today has said that India would be open to the idea of demilitarizing this if the Pakistanis accept who's where. Pakistanis have said they don't want hostility with India for at least 100 years. And something's happening between India and China as well. So I thought, looking at all these three straws in the wind, we'll put together some kind of an explanation for you.